Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Opentext Live webinar series. We will be having the topic, Transcend the Traditional, 3 Pillars for Building a Successful Digital Enterprise with Opentext Shinydrive for Content Server. I'd like to introduce Jason Cassidy. He is the CEO of Shinydocs, and he will be your presenter for the day.
Great. Thanks a lot, Gretchen. So, Transcend the Traditional. There is a great deal of interest right now in digital transformation. It's to the point where every organization understands that it must happen within the organization. There's a great deal of technology out there that is helping organizations not just remove paper processes, but also start driving their business workflows through more modern digital toolkits. And from a enterprise content management and business content services perspective, we support customers in 3 very, very specific ways that reaches across the organization, and it has a pretty big impact. The Shinydrive suite, if you're not familiar with it, is an interface for Opentext Content Server that is sold by Opentext, supported by Opentext, and of course supported by us as the inventor and manufacturer of this interface. We contend that a lot of adoption of enterprise content management, now business content services, heavily relies on making sure that you stay consistent with the end user's preferred workflow with respect to document management. So when I say preferred workflow, I mean that quite often end users don't really feel it's their job to do knowledge management or information governance. Their job is to make the contract or do the work that is required of them, and they need systems that just complement the way they do that business day in and day out. Things like shared drives and local desktops have always been the easiest way to store your data. And what we do with the Shinydrive suite is we actually turn that information into the enterprise content management information in real time. So once you get in a situation where you're starting to get confidence within your Opentext Content Server deployment, lots of people are using it and you're finding more workflow and uses for it, inevitably it comes to the conversation of how do I get my information into that system? The migration question comes up. When what we find with respect to migration is all about confidence. Migration is about knowing that I am going to make good decisions about my data. The data is going to come in with high fidelity. When I say high fidelity, I mean things like the create dates and modify dates are often as important as some of the content itself within a document. So you need those to be retained. File ownership, file permissions, these types of things all go along with the content itself. Things like how do I do transformations of my data, like changing the taxonomy or classifying the data based upon its content. These are types of things that get out of the traditional migration mindset, which might be just one-to-one mappings of information, and more into data understanding. Now that we have machine learning engines at our disposal, we can start doing some very interesting things with respect to the migrations and ongoing understanding of the data. We're introducing the concept of cognitive analysis of data as well to drive the migration and continued use of the data. So simple things, obviously, like understanding where your redundant and obsolete and trivial information is in the data sources, like a file share, is critically important. But now we've got more tools at our disposal, such as recognition of documents and that can actually start being used to drive the workflow. So it's much more interesting to be able to look at a Word document and know it's a particular type of contract as opposed to it being just a Word document in order to perhaps change its taxonomy or classify it appropriately, or even put yourself in a situation where you can dispose of that data. To give a fun example, as we do shared drive cleanup, sometimes we'll run across a document like how to configure your modem for dial-up access to the organization. Obviously, this is something that was really, really important in 1995. So you look at that, and it's obviously an obsolete piece of information. So how can you identify these obsolete things based upon their content? Well, it comes down to a better cognitive analysis prior to migrating that information, because there's quite often not a lot of value in retaining that type of information in your enterprise content management system. It does cost money to do that, so you need a good understanding of how to keep information out of the system as well. For those of you not familiar with Shinydocs, we are the Opentext Technology Partner of the Year for 2016. We have been working in this ecosystem for a number of years and have some good accolades in the meantime, in addition to be nominated for Global Technology Partner of the Year from Opentext for 2017, and we're hopeful for that award in July when we see Opentext in Toronto. And really the motto of our organization is like changing how your company's information is managed should not change how you work. One of the biggest success factors and the confidence builders for organizations is just knowing that people are going to use the system after they put the information governance associated with the system in place. That's what Shinydocs is all about. There's no question that Opentext is the world leader in information governance and enterprise information management, and it checks all of the boxes with respect to the compliance. The only question is, how do you get information into it, and how do people continue to use it? That's why we partnered with Opentext to make sure that we can hit a lot more use cases of end users and really have no excuse for organizations as to why they shouldn't be using the system. One really interesting thing that we look at when we're talking about data, and when I say data, I'm really talking about that unstructured document data that sits outside of databases. And it just happens to be the largest quantity of data that any organization has, and it grows at an incredible rate. I haven't really found the business process yet that tells us why we shouldn't have data growth. As Internet of Things, an industrial Internet of Things comes about, we're just generating tons more data. As more and more users enter the workforce that are more technically proficient, we're going to generate more data. So the idea of reducing the amount of data that we generate year over year is just a non-starter. We're going to generate a ton of structured and unstructured data, and we have to manage it. And to me, that's the most important thing, is not really worrying about the data growth, but just understanding how it could reasonably be managed and what can you do to get 100% of that data under management. If you're paying somebody to generate this content, or you've built a piece of equipment and you've asked it to generate log files or this content, then obviously it's important to you. And without a good understanding of the data, then you won't understand when you can get rid of the data, how it should be classified, when it should be archived, these types of things. So as from the beginning of time to now, we want to look back at the data and really understand it so that we can make better decisions about how to store it and how to retrieve it. And then from today forward, we want to make sure that everything that's going into an Opentext content server is appropriately classified and it has good high fidelity in the information associated with it, so that Opentext content server and your business processes can start making really good decisions about the data, including things like disposition. At this rate of data growth, we're just going to outrun the available storage that we have for us, and it's going to get expensive even if you move into the cloud. So you really have to have a long-term strategy associated with understanding your data so that some of it at some point can get removed. But the practical reality is this document content, the documents that sit on your desktop computers, on your laptop computers, in your shared drives, just these files, it accounts for 80 to 85% of the data that's accruing in the world. And it is, unfortunately, because just the nature of where we store it, it stays outside of the reach of the information governance. So we call this slide kind of the brutal truth, is when we go into organizations, there's usually an appetite for getting more information into ECM, because this is the piece that is managed. This is the piece that has the information governance. You can defensively dispose of information from here because it's been properly classified. There's audit history and compliance with new things like the GDPR that are coming down. You need this type of information across all of your data. However, there's still 30 years of momentum associated with what I'll call just the traditional data storage. And it's hard to get people off of these systems because if I'm using the S drive, I have my relationship with that S drive and my applications know about it. So to be able to say, I'm just going to get off of that and I'm going to start using an enterprise content management system requires the ECM really to step up and adopt my workflow, perhaps even keep my drive letter the same, but provide me all of the power in the background and provide a good migration path that's not going to be disruptive for my business, and it's going to give me some confidence in the business to actually spend the money to do the work We all know that we need the information managed. However, how you get there is by far the most important consideration. And we want all the information to be in the ECM system. We want all the information to be in Content Server, because then you can actually start applying all that information governance principle to all of the data that matters to your organization. If it sits outside of it, you're missing out. And like the cost per terabyte is higher when you're not using it a lot. That cost goes down quite a bit as you expand the use, because generally you have a flat licensing associated with the use of the system. So why not put in more data in there? Your cost per terabyte goes down and your value goes way, way up. So data growth is just the fact of nature right now, and we have to consider how we are going to deal with it. The most important thing is we want you to look at your information and say, what is that information? I'd say look at your file shares and say, what does that mean to me? Is that file share an asset or a liability? And if some of it is a liability, you can ask, what is it about there that I'm afraid of? A lot of organizations that we talk to talk about reducing their security footprint associated with the data. And what I mean by security footprint is it's not just about having, if I have a petabyte of data, then it's easier for hackers to get into than it is if it's 500 terabytes. That's part of it. But some of it has to do with the legal liability associated with some of the information that's in those shared drives. For example, if you're a bank or large insurance companies or these types of things, that's real customer information, it's real corporate information. Some of it you're allowed to get rid of. Some of it you can rationalize a little bit better and create some knowledge out of it. But if it's just sitting there in a shared drive and you're not deriving the value out of it, that information can be used against you in litigation. That information is available for hackers. There's a lot of security things associated with it that organizations would be well served to reduce. And you can't reduce it without a good understanding of the data in the first place. Our solution, we take a look at really how people are managing their information. There's no question in my mind that people like to use enterprise sync and share tools for their ergonomics. They love to use shared drives for the tradition associated with it, and it works with every one of their desktop applications. So rather than fighting that and say, go use our web-based tool or some other tool, what we do is we just sit underneath those systems. We actually make your local drives, shared drives, and we can sit underneath your enterprise file sync and share tools such that Opentext Content Server is capturing all the information. Every save and every save as through each one of these applications is being managed now in the enterprise content management system. We also have the capability by which if we set up some business rules associated with different types of documents, and when I say types, we can use that pretty liberally now that we have some machine learning capacity available to us. We can say certain type of documents that we know that don't have PII or they don't have specific records retention schedules, we can put those into perhaps cloud storage or at least some storage that has lower costs associated with it. And anything that's the higher value data, definitely you put it into enterprise content management because it provides you your highest level of value associated with the management and governance of your data. So ShinyDrive itself, if you're wondering, okay, how do they do that? It actually installs as part of your operating system on Mac and PC. So instead of it being an application that sits there that other applications talk to, and you have to have plugins for your app to make sure it works with the Enterprise Content Management app, in this case Content Server, we actually drive the business workflow from the operating system perspective. So when you do a save as to your P drive, it might actually be a folder within your enterprise workspace. And if there's required categories and attributes, we have the operating system prompt you for that information. And it's just far more seamless to users, and it's just more integrated with the day-to-day workflow of normal document management. So one thing that we've made available is an ebook, because there's just some principles around what it means to do information governance going forward. It's historically, information governance systems were put in place and they work really well when you're using them. But from a business content services standpoint, there's not too much business data out there that doesn't deserve to have effective permission structure, effective version history, scale it to the size of the actual data source, and things like records management, perhaps disposition of data. All of this is important for all of our important data. And if you don't have a strategy around how you're going to apply these principles to all your data, then at some point or another, you're going to be in a situation where you're going to have to go back and then readdress that data. So we're suggesting let's do some migrations that take this stuff into consideration right now. Let's do some analysis on the data that takes us into consideration right now. And most importantly, from this day forward, let's start applying all of these principles and make sure that you can check these boxes as part of your engagement so that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you don't have to go through an even bigger exercise. So I'm going to walk through a use case here. The file share and desktop analysis is something that we're doing with quite a few organizations right now. We can do it as simple as identifying file types and identifying the temporal information associated with documents. How old are the documents and what types do people have on their desktops and file shares? What's the redundant data? And then present that back to the user as part of a pre-migration strategy. But we can also layer on a little bit more interesting analysis of documents, such as a deeper understanding of what the actual document types are from the perspective of the end user. And what this yields is a good understanding of just what it is. If you have 100 terabytes of data and you don't know what's in there, this is a good spot to start. And that drives the migration preparation. It gives you confidence to know, okay, this is the stuff that I really need to go into OpenText Content Server, and it gives you more confidence to be able to classify it effectively. And if you put a Shinydrive in front of it, then it gives you more confidence as far as the ongoing use associated with that data. And that's one of the most important things is quite often we'll get into a migration engagement with the customer and they'll say, okay, I got to get all this file share information or a lot of it into Content Server. Sometimes they want to change the taxonomy. But once it's in there, how are people going to use it? Are they going to switch to Enterprise Connect, or are they going to use Temple Box, or are they going to use the web UI? And all those would be fine if you have a strategy by which you can get all of the users buy-in and have a way for them to learn those new technologies. Like a lot of organizations, that strategy is just not built in. So they kind of run in kind of face first into a situation where we have thousands of users that realized a bit of disruption when we moved all this information into governance. And Shinydrive is a good solution for the ongoing use of this data. It keeps the end user experience consistent, but you get 100% of the value of the enterprise content management system, OpenText Content Server. So I'm going to start up a demo here and walk through just kind of a few scenarios of the types of things that we can do here. And I hope you can see this is OpenText Content Server, happens to be Content Server 10.5. Obviously, our technology works with Content Server 16, the most recent release 16.2, which we're quite excited about. And we go as far back as Content Server 10. The first thing that I want you to have a look at is just the ongoing use of data. Content Server has huge power and flexibility within the platform. They've got plugins for doing every activity from records management to digital rights management and everything in between. However, from the end user perspective, there's a lot there. And CS16 simplifies it absolutely from the workflow perspective of you're in the web presence and you have the ability to do the things that you need to do for your particular job. But from a day-to-day document management perspective, it's really hard to beat the good old shared drive interface that's built into your operating system. If you have a look here, this is, as far as the operating system is concerned, it's just another drive. But we know it happens to be in real time the enterprise workspace. We're different than typical enterprise sync and share tools because this can be your entire enterprise workspace. If this is 100 terabytes of data, this is all 100 terabytes of data available to your users, but the permissions are driven by Content Server. The categories and attributes are driven by Content Server. Obviously, version history, exclusive access through reserve, unreserve, the document management classification, all of that is intact in Content Server, and this is the best window to get into it. And from the perspective of document management, just your day in and day out, what are you going to do with the document? You open it up, you make your change, and you click Save. So from the perspective of the end user, nothing really changes for them. They can do their normal workflow. They can add their documents. It's actually adding versions, obviously, to Content Server in real time. But from their perspective, they're just working on their particular project, and they're doing their day-to-day work. And they don't really have to think about additional knowledge management things in order to get their job done. We can even take it as far as make your personal workspace your My Documents folder. To say, hey, I want every document, 100% of my documents managed by Opentext Content Server, then, hey, let's make your My Documents folder actually your personal workspace so that we get 100% of that information captured. I'll checkpoint the conversation here real quickly, just to make sure that everybody understands. Like, this is an interface for Content Server. And in our opinion, it's the easiest one to use and perhaps the easiest one to deploy across thousands of users, just because they don't have to know exactly what they're doing from an enterprise content management standpoint to use the system day in and day out. It works on both Mac and PC, and the PC version has recently introduced some additional capabilities such as offline. Traditionally, our ShinyDrive has always been more like a shared drive, so you need to be connected, but offline is something a lot of people are asking for, so that's something that we've put into the platform. In addition, we have our Outlook integration. One of the nice things about the Outlook integration, obviously it gives you the ability to manage your emails into email folders within Content Server, and all of the fidelity of the email is intact. For example, it goes in as an email object and it extracts out the attachments, and all that works great. One of the nice things about this interface, this is the same as your desktop interface. So you get all your Content Server functionality, but you get all the additional just normal desktop functionality. So if you have plugins or you're driving additional desktop workflow things that are outside of the scope of enterprise content management, it works great within Outlook. So what we find is that people who work all day in Outlook, this is a really nice tool for them because it provides the normal desktop experience. It's something that they don't really have to learn. Plus they get, of course, the ability to do their records retention and the ability to store their email and that type of thing within Opentext Content Server. Now that you have a good interface, let's start talking about how do you get information into Content Server itself. I'm going to show a couple of different examples of the types of things that we can do. The first thing that we do with any organization is really start thinking about what it actually means to evaluate your data. So we have crawler technology that will crawl through shared drives and desktops to give a really good understanding of the data that are on all these different systems. And we can do it to the point of understanding whether it's Word, Excel, PowerPoint files and other trivial files, find the redundant files and flag them as duplicates, find obsolete documents based upon their temporal values. But we can also layer on additional functionality to do the recognition of the documents itself. So rather than just being a Word document, now we can know if it's contract type A, contract type B, contract type C. And that really helps drive migration and workflow a lot better and understanding of your data. What I'm going to do actually is have a look at just an old shared drive, and we're going to look at its migration from a couple of different perspectives. Here's an H drive. This is data that kind of looks like human resources data, and a lot of people have been using it for a long time. There's some current postings in there. I'd like the people who are using the H drive, I'd love them to use Content Server. So if I go into Content Server and say, hey, I want you to work here. Well, what happens in the event that all that data is not there? Human resources folder, it's empty. I want everybody to work here. Everybody historically has been working in their H drive. So how do we harmonize that? Well, traditionally you would go and do a bulk migration, perhaps you do some taxonomy transformation, and then you train users up on how to use this interface and get it done that way. We have a much easier way to approach this. we can do what's called our user-led migration. And what that does, I'm going to unmap the shared drive, which might be terrifying for some of your users. They just lost their H drive, and now all the recent file histories and linked Excel spreadsheets and all that just broke. But this is what we'll do for them in that circumstance. We will connect to both their shared drive storage and content server at the same time, and we'll give them their H drive back. So when we have a look, it's the same content in the same location as far as the end user is concerned. It's the same path and H drive, it's the same documents. Something a little different, you notice that there's a little icon here. What that means is that, hey, this is a document that hasn't been migrated into content server yet. Well, how do you migrate something into content server? Well, you start using it. You open it up, you make your change, you click save. I'm using the document. So just the fact that I've opened it up, just the fact that I've even previewed it within the Windows Explorer interface is enough for us to identify, hey, this is an important document from the end user perspective. Let's move it into content server for its ongoing maintenance and use. So this is a migration strategy that you can use that requires no downtime and no upfront migration. It just does it in real time on behalf of the users. And it keeps a pretty high fidelity as well. So when the social media policy, here's the first version of it that was from the shared drive. It has its original create date and modified date, so you can start driving some records management retention policies associated with that. And here's the version that I just saved right now at 11:33 a.m. Eastern Time. Right away, you get people using content server, and you didn't have to do a migration up front. So this is called our user-led migration. Now I do want to draw attention. Some of you who are really savvy will look at this and go, okay, that's cool, we're doing user-led migration, but this is only doing the stuff that people are touching day in and day out. They're happy about that because nobody's being disrupted the way that they work from day to day. You didn't take away their H drive, so they're pretty excited about that. However, this is just the data that they're happen to be working on today. So what about the other information that isn't active information? How do we get that within content server? We do apply a more traditional migration capability to this, but it's a pretty powerful migration technique that we have. We have a number of scripting environments that we apply. We built just a demonstration interface to show. I'm going to put the content, that same HR content that we saw before, but I'm going to brute force it into this location within content server. So when I run this migration tool, and this is server to server now, this is not something that an end user would ever use. It is actually brute force going through the entire shared drive, and based upon the rules that we set up in the scripts, it's going to transform the data or bring in data based upon particular dates. And if we have a look, hey, the original create dates and modified dates are still intact on every one of the documents. And what's even more interesting, if I go back to the original file system where I'm picking up this information, things like permissions are fully intact as well. So this document here has security group permissions associated with it and has a discrete user for this JCASD user. And if I go in and I have a look at that same document within Content Suite, and you'll see the JCASD user has read CNC contents on it. So you get pretty high fidelity of, obviously you get the original file name, you get the file type, you get the create dates and modified dates, you get the file system owner, and you get the ability to have the permissions come in across as well. And I hope you agree, this is a good confidence builder. You got your end users covered because you're going to keep them whole and you're going to keep them using the similar experience to what they had before, or in this case, if we use the same taxonomy, the exact same experience. But you get the full fidelity of your documents going in the content server, and you get just the added benefit, of course, of the reason that you brought in Opentext in the first place, is all the information governance associated with this. Now you're subject to all of that, whether it be search, audit history, driving additional workflow, compliance. All of those things now you've checked all those boxes, but your end users, in some cases, wouldn't even know that it has happened. So I do want to draw attention one more thing here, the ebook that covers some of the ground that we're talking about here. So if you go to www.shinydocs.com/ebook, you can download the ebook here, and it's a good spot to get the discussion going with us. And if nothing else, it's a pretty good understanding of where the industry is headed and what you can expect right now. With that, I'd like to wrap up. My name, of course, is Jason Cassidy. I'm the CEO of Shinydocs Corporation. And I've also included the email address of Paul Kleinknecht. He's our VP of Worldwide Sales, and he's a great resource to get a conversation started with as well. And we'd love for you to get in contact with us.